We're now on page 5 of the 2.7 notes. So now we get a chance to graph one of the functions from the first page. So the first thing I do is I look at its power. The highest power is 3. So remember, degree 1, power 1 is a straight line. Power 2, parabola. Power 3, S-curve. So I know already that this is going to look like an S-curve just because I have them memorized. Like I said, you just need to memorize the first two, but they just want to show you how you would do a graph if you didn't have everything memorized. I do require 5 points whenever someone's graphing what I call a higher order function, which means higher powers. And unless I'm told otherwise, I do what's called a basic t-table, which is -2 to +2 in your x column. Okay? So that's usually where I start. If I see I need more on the left or more on the right, I'll add some in. But this is the basic t-table. And probably when you first learn t-tables, your teacher used the same values. So how I find y, or f of x, I plug this in for x. So f of -2 is, and remember how we learned yesterday, anytime your input is negative, it must, not optional, must be in parentheses. So -2 times -2 times -2 is -8. If you wanted to do it on your calculator, I'm always trying to show you this because I want you guys to be efficient on the calculator. Parentheses -2, and up until now we've been using this key, but this is x squared. So if we have a power higher than 2, we use this little button here. It's called the caret key. So we do caret. So that means up in the air, 3. So that's how you type in -2 to the third. So that means the 3's up in the air, and you can see it is -8. And then f of -1 is -1 in parentheses cubed. -1 times -1 times -1 is -1. Let me show you a cool trick with the calculator. I love to show tricks. So if you hit the up arrow, you won't have to type this again. Just go over the top of the 2, put in a 1, and hit enter. Ding, ding, ding. There it is, -1. So the up arrow will produce all the lines that you've typed, like the last 10 or so that you've typed in. So if you keep hitting that, you can get to different things so you don't have to start over. I just think that's the coolest button. I love it. Especially like when you're doing the quadratic formula in chapter 7, which we do. It's nice to not have to type that whole thing again. Okay, next we have, so that's enough of me with my little games, right? So f of 0 equals 0 cubed. 0 times 0 times 0 is 0. F of 1 is 1 cubed. Notice I've dropped the parentheses because now I'm not inputting a negative, I'm inputting a positive. 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And last but not least, f of 2 is 2 times 2 times 2, which is +8. So we call this the cubic function, and now you're going to learn how to graph it. So -2 goes down to -8, which would be right here, 5, 6, 7, 8. So -2, -8. Our next point is -1, -1 on the y, so -1 on the x, -1 on the y, 0, 0. Because remember from the other page, I kept it here so we could look at it. The cubic does, if it hasn't been shifted, go through the origin. So this is what we're aiming for, this kind of shape. And then 1, 1, x is 1, y is 1. And last, x is 2, y is 8. And then it's sometimes easier to draw these sideways. So I'm going to do this part first. So no elbows, no big bends. This is just a smooth curve with arrows on both ends. So because we're just new with domain and range, every chance we get, I want us to do it. So don't look back at the last page. Let's see if we can do domain and range on our own. In fact, shut the video off and see if you can write it without looking at the last page all by yourself. Because I do know you have 4 questions on your test that ask you to write domain and range. So use interval notation and see if you can get it. So go ahead and shut off the video and then come back and join me. Okay, for domain, it's left to right. So I see this arrow showing me it's going to go left, 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 right, 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 right. Because it doesn't go straight up. It's just going to slowly go right, slowly go left. Curves are never vertical, never straight up and down. And you can see that it's slowly going left, slowly going right. So if it's going to go left forever and right forever, did you all put negative infinity to positive infinity? And then range is bottom to top. So what's the lowest y value? Boom, down there at negative infinity again. What's the highest y value? Boom, look at that arrow going up. That would be positive infinity. So the cubic is kind of the easiest one because both its domain and range, left forever, right forever, down forever, and up forever. Gotta love the cubics, right? Okay, so like I said, that is more of a concept for the next class, but you should be able to use t-tables and draw any figure you're asked to using the t-table. So go ahead and read that box. I'm going to shut my door because I hear my dog snoring. So definition of a quadratic function. A quadratic function is a function whose highest power is 2. Quadratic functions graph as parabolas. So parabolas can cup up, and let's put the arrows in. Computer-generated graphs sometimes do not have the arrows there, and that drives me crazy because then students miss the domain and range because they think it stops there, and it does not. So second degree equations are called quadratics. I know the name's confusing, isn't it? Quad means 4, but in math, quad means 2. So quadratic function is a second degree function. That means its highest power is 2. And they graph as parabolas. So let's highlight the important words there. So it's called a quadratic function. It looks like this, and this, by the way, is what we study the rest of the class, our quadratics. So everything we do from here on out is about quadratics. So the pretty big definition. And quadratics graph as a parabola. And parabolas can cup up or they can cup down, and we can tell by looking at the initial function which it is. So it's the leading coefficient. Have you guys ever heard that vocabulary before? That's the number in front of the highest power. So the highest power is 2, so A is called the leading coefficient. If it's positive, and a lot of students see this and that doesn't like, A is positive, so that doesn't click to them. You know, they go, oh, well, there's an inequality. I wonder what that means. When it says A is greater than 0, they're saying when A, this leading number in front of x squared, is positive, the parabola will cup upward. And we call this point here, which we're going to learn later on, it's the vertex, is going to be the lowest point on the graph. So we call it the minimum. And we learn all this. We have a whole chapter on parabolas coming up. This is just kind of introducing you. If A is negative, that means less than 0. So I'll just give you a real basic one. So if y equals 3x squared, so there's an example of A positive. if we had y equals negative 3x squared. That's an example of a being negative. So when a is negative, the parabola tips upside down or cups downward. And this time the vertex of the parabola, which is the turning point, is going to be the highest point on the graph. So we call that the maximum. So it's all determined, cupping up, cupping down, by that leading coefficient, or the number in front of x squared is what determines it. Okay, so now that we know what linear is from our first 4 sections, y equals mx plus b, we know what constant is. We learned that on the front page. A constant's a horizontal line. If you look back here, they said it's the constant function, and that's because it stays constant. It doesn't change. Remember, zero fun. I can ski on it, but it's zero fun. So that's called the constant. So we know what a linear function is. We know what a constant function is. We just learned what a quadratic function is. So what we're going to do here is go through these 4 and identify which is which. So I'm going to let you try it first. So just go through and write either linear, constant, quadratic, or none. And like I said, don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we learn. Nobody got it right every time the first time. Even Einstein, he'll tell you that he learned the most from making mistakes. So try it on your own, then come back and we'll go over it together. Okay, so A, the first thing I look at, because in order to know which of these it is, I have to look at the highest power. I see the highest power is x squared. So I don't know if you all know this, but at any time you can rearrange the term. So you can make this negative 3x squared, keep the signs with it. This would be a negative 5x. So whatever sign's in front of it travels with it when you rearrange it. And that 12 doesn't have a sign, so it's positive 12. So once you put it in what we call standard form or descending powers, then you can easily go, oh, highest power is 2, so I know that is a quadratic. And it will graph as an upside down parabola. All quadratics graph as parabolas, and that's what tips it upside down, that negative leading coefficient. B's a little bit trickier. That one sometimes tricks students. Whenever you have something in the denominator that goes into both of those, you just divide them both by this. So this is really the same thing as this. 5x over 5 minus 10 over 5. So that item in the denominator goes into both terms in the numerator. So if I were to simplify this, I get f of x equals 1x minus 2. In other words, y equals mx plus b, right? Because f of x is really y, and isn't that just y equals mx plus b? So m is 1, b is negative 2, f of x is our y. So we know this is linear. So it's called a linear function, or when we write it like this, it's called a linear equation. So linear function, when we use that notation, linear equation. Here you should recognize this from the front page. It's called the reciprocal function. So we need to write none, and we can write reciprocal function just to remind ourselves from the front. So anytime x is in the denominator, that makes it a reciprocal function. I hope I spelled that right, reciprocal. And this is y equals 12, which we know when there's only a y, it's a horizontal line, so it's the constant function. And be sure and write horizontal line too.